The Enoch Timeline, History and Rediscovery. One Enoch was revered by early believers, then suppressed by 4th century Roman authorities to sanitize theology. It survived in the Ethiopian Highlands, was rediscovered in 1773, and scientifically validated by the 1947 Dead Sea Scrolls. This wasn't a later fabrication. It is an ancient foundational text that existed well before the Christian era. The controversy. Why it was suppressed. The text's exclusion wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate theological decision. The book's narrative centers on the controversial account of the Watchers, fallen angels, whose actions challenged established doctrines. This content led theologians to denounce the work as heretical. Consequently, the term apocryphal, which originally meant hidden or exalted, was redefined to imply something forbidden or untrue, effectively burying the text for a millennium. The paradigm shift, the 1947 discovery. For generations, academic critics questioned the age and validity of the Book of Enoch, often dismissing it as a late post-Christian construction. That perspective changed fundamentally in 1947. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Qumran caves provided hard, physical evidence that transformed biblical scholarship. We were no longer dealing with conjecture. We had physical, ancient Aramaic fragments that verified the text's existence well before the time of Jesus Christ. Scientific and textual validation. The importance of these Qumran fragments cannot be overstated. First, they provide scientific validation that the Book of Enoch was actively read and preserved by Jewish communities during the Second Temple period. Second, when scholars compared these 2,000-year-old fragments to the later Ethiopic manuscripts preserved in Ethiopia, they discovered a startlingly high degree of textual integrity. This proves that despite centuries of isolation, the book was transmitted with incredible accuracy, preserving its historical legacy. Corroboration with New Testament thought. Perhaps most significant is the link to the New Testament. The presence of Enochian fragments at Qumran confirms that early Christians and the authors of the New Testament had direct access to this material. This isn't just theory. The Epistle of Jude quotes the Book of Enoch directly. Beyond direct quotes, the book's specific terminology, such as the concept of the elect one who sits upon the throne of glory, permeates early Christian thought regarding judgment and the kingdom of heaven. It is difficult to avoid the conclusion that the apostles and early believers studied and respected this text as a valid, inspired prophecy. Final summary. 1 Enoch is a foundational document. Ultimately, the archaeological record has silenced the claim that 1 Enoch is a later fabrication. We are looking at a document that was a foundational influence on early religious thought. It has been vindicated by the earth itself, moving from a lost text to a central pillar in our understanding of the ancient world's spiritual landscape. The canonical Bible, the lost text, the myth of the static canon. We often assume the 66-book Bible we hold today is a static, universal list that has existed since the time of the apostles. In reality, the concept of canonicity is far more political. The term canon itself comes from a Roman rule, a statute or code, rather than an ancient spiritual decree. It wasn't until the 4th century, under figures like Pope Damasus, that the Roman Church solidified the list of what would be accepted as inspired scripture and what would be pushed aside. The erasure of Enoch. Why was 1 Enoch specifically targeted? It wasn't that the book was lost in a literal sense, it was actively suppressed. The narrative surrounding the Watchers, fallen angels whose actions and teachings challenged the theological orthodoxies of the time, made church leaders uncomfortable. By redefining the term apocryphal from its original meaning of hidden or exalted to imply heretical or forbidden, the text was effectively purged from Western tradition. The Ethiopian Exception. It is important to remember that 1 Enoch was never truly lost to everyone. While the Western world buried the text, the Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo churches have kept 1 Enoch in their scriptural canon continuously for centuries. The book was not missing, it was simply removed from the specific lists prioritized by Rome and later by the Protestant reformers who followed the Jewish canon formed late in the 2nd century AD. Modern significance, proving its antiquity. The paradigm shift, 1947 discovery. For generations, academic critics dismissed the Book of Enoch as a post-Christian construction. The 1947 discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Qumran caves was the scientific checkmate. We moved from conjecture to hard, physical evidence, ancient Aramaic fragments that verify the text's existence well before the time of Jesus Christ. Scientific validation. These fragments provide undeniable proof that the Book of Enoch was actively read and preserved by Jewish communities during the Second Temple period. It fundamentally shatters the argument that the book was a later, late-stage invention. We now have physical, historical context for its circulation. Critical textual integrity. When scholars compared these 2,000-year-old Qumran fragments to the later Ethiopic manuscripts, they discovered a startlingly high degree of textual agreement. This proves that despite centuries of isolation and transmission across different languages and regions, the book was preserved with incredible accuracy, validating its deep historical legacy. Corroboration with New Testament thought. The presence of Enochian fragments at Qumran confirms that the authors of the New Testament had direct access to this material. This is not just theory. The Epistle of Jude quotes Enoch directly. Beyond direct quotes, the book's terminology, like the elect one who sits on the throne of glory, permeates early Christian thought regarding the kingdom of heaven. It confirms that the apostles and early believers regarded this text as valid, inspired prophecy. Summary, a foundational document. Ultimately, the archaeological record has silenced the claim that 1 Enoch is a fabrication. It has been vindicated by the Orth itself, moving the text from a lost curiosity to a central pillar in our understanding of the ancient spiritual landscape. The canonicity matrix. The myth of the static list. We often assume the 66-book Bible has been a universal static list since the Apostles. However, canon is actually a Roman legal term, referring to a statute or code, rather than an ancient spiritual decree. Canonicity was fundamentally an act of administrative authority. It wasn't until the 4th century, under figures like Pope Damasus, that the Roman Church solidified the matrix of what would be accepted as inspired and what would be relegated to the outside. The rebranding of Apocryphal. Why was Enoch specifically targeted for removal? It wasn't because it was lost, it was actively suppressed. The book's narrative, specifically the account of the Watchers, challenged the theological orthodoxy of the time. Church leaders faced a problem, so they solved it through a linguistic shift. They took the term apocryphal, originally meaning hidden or exalted, and rebranded it to mean heretical or forbidden. This allowed them to purge the text from Western tradition while maintaining the appearance of theological purity. The Ethiopian Exception. This suppression was not universal. While the Western world buried the text, the Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo churches have kept 1 Enoch in their scriptural canon continuously for centuries. This exception disproves the rule of a static Western canon. It proves the text was not missing. It was simply removed from the specific lists prioritized by Rome and later adopted by the Protestant reformers. The apostolic authority paradox. This brings us to the core conflict. The Apostle Jude explicitly quotes the Book of Enoch in the New Testament as valid prophecy. If the apostles, the very architects of our faith, studied, respected, and quoted Enoch, on what authority was it later stripped away? We are left with a 66-book canon, yet historically, Rome recognized 79. The exclusion of Enoch was not an inevitable truth. It was a deliberate political choice. When we read Enoch today, we aren't reading lost lore. We are reclaiming a foundational document that the early church fathers regarded as inspired prophecy. Moving from history to prophecy. The architecture of the text. We've spent our time so far on the historical journey, the controversy, the suppression, and the archaeological rediscovery. But to truly engage with the text, we must understand its architecture. 1 Enoch is not a single monolithic narrative. It is a collection of distinct books, including the Book of the Watchers, the Book of Noah, and the Epistle of Enoch. However, if you want to understand the true prophetic engine of the entire work, you must look at the center of the manuscript, the 3 parables. The parables, the prophetic core.
These are not simple morality tales. They are profound apocalyptic visions, Enoch showing us what is to come. They are the messianic climax of the entire work. The first parable, separation of spirits, sets the stage for divine accountability. It reveals a cosmic order where the righteous, the elect, are vindicated and the wicked are removed. It asserts that the exaltation of the wicked is temporary and that universal moral law will be settled. The second parable, the Son of Man, the elect one. This is the undeniable heart of the work. Enoch envisions the Ancient of Days sitting upon the throne of glory beside another being, the Son of Man, or the elect one. This figure was named before creation, serving as a pillar of pre-existence. When New Testament writers describe the Son of Man, they are walking on ground this parable paved centuries earlier. The third parable, the final victory. If the first is about judgment, the second about the Messiah, the third is about restoration. It shifts from heavy judgment to a vision of an eternal kingdom, a transformation where the elect walk in peace, free from the sorrow that defined the era of the Watchers. Why it matters. Why focus here? Because the parables provide the roadmap. If the Book of the Watchers explains why the world is broken, the parables explain how that brokenness is resolved. They transform the Book of Enoch from ancient lore into a coherent prophetic message of hope. This is why early church fathers, like Tertullian and Irenaeus, held this text in such high regard. They saw in these parables an inspired window into the destiny of the righteous and the nature of the Messiah.
The fall of the Watchers, the rebellion at Mount Hermon. The Watchers' rebellion is the Enochian narrative's foundational catastrophe. Led by Semyaza, 200 angels broke their heavenly office, overcome by lust for the daughters of men. They swore a binding oath on Mount Hermon to abandon their divine posts, effectively severing their tie to the Creator. The forbidden curriculum. Upon descending, they acted as teachers of forbidden knowledge. Azazel introduced humanity to metallurgy, weapons, vanity, cosmetics, and ornaments. Other Watchers taught astrology, the course of the moon, and sorcerous enchantments. This was an illicit, premature transfer of heavenly secrets, a corrupting technology humanity was not meant to wield. The era of the giants. Their union with human women produced the Nephilim. Standing 3,000 elis high, these were not mythical heroes, but entities of pure destruction. They exhausted humanity's resources and eventually turned to violence, consuming flesh and blood. It is a visceral depiction of a world that had lost its moral foundation, serving as the ultimate justification for the coming judgment. Why the church feared this story. This narrative explains the book's suppression. By portraying angels as capable of lust, rebellion, and cultural corruption, Enoch fundamentally changed the theological landscape. It presented evil not as a simple lack of goodness, but as a sophisticated infection introduced by external beings. It made the supernatural world feel dangerously, volatilely close to human affairs. Church leaders suppressed this to maintain a controlled, distant, and predictable theology.
The anatomy of a giant. The unnatural scale, physicality. The Nephilim are described as 3,000 ells high. In the ancient world, this is profound hyperbole, defining them as monsters existing outside God's natural order. Born from the illicit union of Watchers and humans, they are biological anomalies, a forbidden fusion of the spiritual and material that was never meant to occur. The anatomy of consumption, appetite. Their behavior reveals a predatory anatomy. The text notes they consumed all the acquisitions of men. They were not just physically imposing, they were structurally parasitic. They exhausted humanity's resources and eventually turned to flesh and blood. This insatiable hunger defines their existence. They weren't created to build, cultivate, or sustain, but to deplete. They are the embodiment of excess and violation. The spiritual architecture, legacy. The most chilling aspect is their spiritual nature.
The giants are the origin point for the evil spirits that plague the earth. Upon their death, their spirits, having proceeded from the Watchers and human flesh, did not vanish. Instead, they remain, destined to afflict, oppress, destroy, attack until final judgment. They were vessels for spiritual infection, hosts for a corruption that outlived their physical forms, continuing to work destruction long after their reign of terror ended. The justification for judgment. Their physical destruction was necessary because they fundamentally wronged mankind, turning the earth into a place of slaughter. Their existence is physical proof that the divine order had been shattered. They were the catalyst for the flood. Their presence was the visceral sign that the world needed cleansing. To understand the giant is to understand why the cry of the earth reached the gates of heaven, demanding justice.
This was a specific reckoning. Leaders like Azazel and Samjaza were confined for eternity. Crucially, the destruction of the giants was vital because their spirits remained as evil spirits, demonic influence, necessitating a total cleansing of the earth. The archangels acted as active agents of divine governance, enforcing the righteous balance of the cosmos. The parables and the elect one. The prophetic heart of Enoch. Enoch provides the roadmap of what is to come in the second parable, the vision of the Son of Man. The undeniable core is the second parable. Enoch envisions the head of days, the Ancient of Days, on a throne of glory, beside another being, the Son of Man, or elect one. The text makes a staggering claim of pre-existence. This figure was named before the creation of the sun and stars. He is the staff upon which the righteous lean and the light of the Gentiles. The bridge to New Testament Christology. The parallels with early Christian thought are profound. In Luke 9:35, the voice at the Transfiguration declares, "This is my Son, the elect one," a specific title appearing 14 times in Enoch. Whether it is Jude's direct quotation or the shared descriptions of the Messiah on the throne of glory, early believers clearly viewed this text as a foundational document that paved the way for understanding the Messiah's role as the final judge. Divine judgment and restoration. The elect one brings not just comfort, but justice. He is the judge who raises the mighty from their thrones and breaks the teeth of the sinners. This represents cosmic accountability, the judgment of the unrighteous by the one chosen before the world existed. Ultimately, these parables transform Enoch's message from a warning about past corruption into a hopeful vision of an eternal, restored relationship between the Creator and the righteous. The Book of Luminaries and the Prophecy of Weeks. The Book of Luminaries contrasts the Watcher's chaos with the Creator's perfect, steadfast order. The Prophecy of Weeks acts as history's master timeline, a linear progression toward restoration. These sections remind us that the end is determined, the judgment is sure, and the kingdom of the elect is certain.
The Prophecy of Weeks. The historical panorama. If the Book of the Watchers explains the catastrophe of our past, the Prophecy of Weeks provides the master timeline for our future. Enoch compresses the entirety of human history, from the dawn of man to the end of time, into 10 distinct weeks or eras. This is more than chronology. It is a declaration that history is purposeful, linear, ordained by the Creator, rather than a series of random, chaotic events. The structure of time. The first 7 weeks span from Enoch's era through the giving of the law into the Messianic age. This represents the long period of human struggle, where the corruption introduced by the Watchers is slowly addressed and purged from the earth. The final 3 weeks turn intensely apocalyptic. They describe the righteous judgment, the moment when the sword of justice falls definitively upon the wicked, preparing the world for a new reality. The eternal kingdom, week 10. The 10th week represents the ultimate climax, the final eternal reality. This aligns with the heaven kingdom vision, marking the restoration of all things. The brokenness initiated by the Watchers is completely repaired, and the righteous inherit an eternal existence. For Enoch, this was the inevitable destination of a world that began with a divine mandate for righteousness. Why this matters. Enoch recorded this to give hope to the remote generation mentioned in the book's first chapter, us.
By mapping out these 10 weeks, Enoch reassures us that even when the world feels chaotic and it seems the mighty or the fallen are in control, the timeline is already fixed. The end is determined, the judgment is sure, and the kingdom of the elect is certain. This prophecy anchors our faith in God's ultimate sovereignty, reminding us that regardless of the trials of our current age, the story is moving toward a final righteous victory.
Addressing the strange. Validating the reaction. Let's address the elephant in the room. Parts of Enoch are strange. To modern readers, narratives about celestial beings descending, mating with humans, and creating giants can feel like science fiction rather than religious text. If you feel unsettled by this weirdness, know that you are in good company. The theologians who originally campaigned for the book's suppression felt exactly the same. Modern filter versus ancient worldview. The issue isn't the text, it's our modern filter. We view history through rationalism, separating the spiritual from the physical. The Enochian authors didn't. They saw the supernatural as the underlying architecture of reality. Calling these stories strange just highlights how far our worldview has diverged. To grasp the author's message about the gravity of sin, we must lean into this strangeness rather than dismissing it. Why the strange was a threat. This strangeness explains why the book was suppressed. The 4th century church hierarchy wanted a predictable, domesticated narrative with a distant God. Enoch disrupts this, portraying a world where the supernatural is dangerously close and angelic actions have irrevocable, volatile consequences. By dismissing the text, institutions of power were preserving a controlled version of history. The value of discomfort. We shouldn't skip these uncomfortable parts. They explain why the world needed a savior. It wasn't just about general sin. It was a cataclysmic, cosmic rebellion that shattered creation's order. When we stop trying to rationalize these elements and accept them as the authors intended, the Book of Enoch transforms into a powerful explanation for why justice must be absolute. The takeaway. Suspend your modern skepticism. Don't read as a critic searching for errors or mythology. Read as a student of the ancient mind. If we accept the text on its own terms, as a warning about the volatility of human and angelic interaction, the strange parts become the very keys to understanding the spiritual depth of the early church. The theological bridge. The missing scaffolding. We often treat the New Testament as if it emerged in a theological vacuum. In reality, the Book of Enoch acts as a crucial bridge, a missing piece of the puzzle that explains the specific language and worldview of the early church. Before the Gospels were written, the Enochian framework regarding judgment, the Messiah, and the elect one was already embedded in the spiritual consciousness of the Second Temple period. We aren't reading just an extra book, we are uncovering the foundational literature that paved the way for the apostolic message. The elect one and the transfiguration. The strongest evidence for this connection is the title, The Elect One. In Enoch, this figure sits on the throne of glory and judges the secrets of the world, used 14 times in the text. When we read Luke 9:35 at the Transfiguration, the voice from the cloud declares, "This is my son, the elect one." Early believers didn't hear this as a random label. They heard it as an explicit, prophetic fulfillment of the Enochian writings they were already studying. The apostolic witness, Jude. The apostles themselves solidified this bridge. The Epistle of Jude doesn't just reference Enoch, it quotes him directly, Jude 1:14-15, citing his prophecy as valid truth. This proves beyond doubt that the architects of our faith were not only aware of the Book of Enoch, but considered it a legitimate source of divine revelation. To the apostles, this wasn't apocryphal or forbidden. It was an inspired document that illuminated the nature and work of the Messiah. Christ as the final judge. Finally, consider the role of the Messiah. The Enochian Son of Man is not a passive figure. He is the ultimate judge who raises the mighty from their thrones and breaks the power of the wicked. This vision of a Messiah who executes righteous judgment is the direct theological archetype for New Testament descriptions of Jesus' return. By re-engaging with Enoch, we uncover the theological lens through which the earliest Christians viewed their Savior, a lens that was intentionally removed from the Western canon, but remains visible in the scriptures we still hold today.
Message for a remote generation. The prophecy of a target audience. We began this presentation by looking at Enoch's own words in the first chapter. I heard everything and understood what I saw, but not for this generation, but for a remote one, which is for to come. For thousands of years, this book sat in silence, denounced, banned, and buried. But perhaps, in the grand design of history, that suppression was actually a preservation. We have to ask ourselves, are we that remote generation he spoke of? The rediscovery as an intentional act. Consider the path this book took to reach us. It was preserved in the isolation of the Ethiopian Highlands for a millennium, untouched by the shifting tides of Western dogma. It was hidden in the caves of Qumran, waiting for the modern era to unearth the proof of its antiquity. It wasn't lost to history. It was kept in reserve. The archaeological evidence didn't just appear. It surfaced precisely when our modern, skeptical worldview began to struggle with the very questions Enoch answers: the reality of the spiritual realm, the nature of judgment, and the identity of the elect one. Moving beyond history into insight. Throughout this presentation, we've covered significant ground: the politics of canonicity, the rebellion of the Watchers, the mechanics of the cosmos, and the messianic hope of the parables. But if we leave here seeing this only as a collection of ancient artifacts, we've missed the point. This book acts as a key. It provides the scaffolding for the Christian faith that was stripped away by political decree centuries ago. When we read Enoch, we are reclaiming a foundational document that the apostles themselves studied and respected. The final challenge. As we conclude, I want to leave you with this. If Enoch truly wrote these mysteries for a future generation, and that generation is ours, then the retrieval of this text isn't a curiosity, it's a responsibility. The lost text has been found, and the silence has been broken. The question is no longer, where is the Book of Enoch? The question is, what will we do with the wisdom it offers us now that it's back in our hands?